All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's Limited Level Ups. Today, we're going to be talking about drafting control in Edge of Eternities. And if you've caught my stream recently, you'll know this is something that I've been doing a lot. I've found myself in blue-black control quite a bit this week. I've been pretty successful with it. So, of course, I want to share my tips and tricks in that department. But also, I think it's just a pretty good time to talk about controlling strategies in the format right now. We're at a point in the format where I feel like it's shifted a little bit compared to what it was a week or two ago. It's a little bit less smashy, a little bit more, all right, who's up the most cards at the end of the day? Who has the better top end? I feel like now that the format's developed a little bit, we've got a little more room, a little more breathing space for these slower decks to have a good showing. So that's what we're in for today. Just before we jump in, I want to give a quick apology for this episode coming a little bit later than it usually does in the week. It is Sunday as I'm recording this. Usually the episode comes out Friday. On Friday morning, my computer just died completely. So, spent the weekend getting a new computer. It's all good now. We're fixed. But yeah, just wanted to say thank you for the patience, everybody. Let's jump into today's show. So, let's start by talking about what's happening in the format right now and why I think it's a pretty good time to start drafting decks like the one you have in front of me, which is one of my latest blue-black trophies. So, one of the things that has pushed me towards finding myself in blue-black a lot is that the green decks that were quite prevalent in the first week or two of the format, the power level of those decks has kind of gone down a little bit because people are drafting green appropriately and the power gets dispersed, right, amongst the various green decks at the table. You often have like 4 or 5 people kind of fighting for green, and so you don't get this concentration of power of like, well, you got all the awesome green cards. And in particular, a bunch of awesome green cards can give a blue-black control deck a bit of an issue, I find. Because, their things, they hit really hard, right, starting on turn 3. You've got your Thawbringers and your 4-mana 4/4 tramples and your 5-mana 5/5s. And for a control deck, well, yes, if you just point and click a removal spell at those things, you gotta have it right away. Or else you're just taking like 4 and then 8 and then dead. So yeah, personally, I haven't found myself gravitating towards the green decks all that much. I just find like they're not usually the open lane in my seat. And 2, one of the big bads for a blue-black control deck is not as big and bad as it once was. So yeah, part of why I want to talk about control on today's episode is just, I've been drafting a ton of blue-black control. But the second thing that really made me say, oh, this is probably a good time to talk about this is I was listening to the streamer call put on by my set review partner, Mark Anderson. And if you haven't caught wind of this before, it's a really, really great piece of, I'm going to call it content. Mark says at the beginning of each recording, this isn't content. It's not edited, but it's a great way to hear a bunch of excellent Magic players talk about Limited. So if you don't know what this is, basically what happens is once per set, generally right before the arena open, Mark will host a call where he'll invite a bunch of really top-notch Limited players. So you've got like pretty often Sam Black, The Ham, DeFore, Jason Yee, Jean-Emmanuel Depraz join this time. I join when I can. And basically the whole premise of this is like, all right, well, what's been successful for you? What's your takes on the format? Are there any decks that are kind of, flying under the radar, things you've been successful with that maybe other people haven't? I'll post a link to this in the description, by the way. JED actually recorded it, and it's on his YouTube channel, so go check it out after this if you want to hear that. It's a great conversation. And one of the sentiments that was shared amongst a lot of the players in this call was that you really, now in the format, have to plan for the late game, want to include a bunch of card draw, want to be going big. If your plan is just to go, okay, play a 2-drop that attacks, 3-drop that attacks, 4-drop that attacks, you're going to have a bit of a tough time now that the format has shifted a little bit. JED, Jean-Emmanuel Depraz, even went as far as to say, I don't think there's a good aggro deck in this format. He kind of prefaced this with like, okay, this might be a hot take, but I don't think there's a good aggro deck in this format. And I wouldn't go quite that far, but I kind of agree with the sentiment, where it's like, the 2-drops and the 1-drop, there's not that many 1-drops, but the 2-drops, the 1-drops that exist, they're not all that aggressive. They can be blocked, right? And that's kind of the hallmark of a good 2-drop, that it's hard to be blocked, right? If it's evasive or it's giant, there's not a ton of those. And so if you're just keeping pace with your opponent, like you're playing a 2-mana card that affects the board, a 3-mana card that affects the board, a 4-mana card that affects the board, you're not going to get run over. You're not going to die to an aggro start all that often. And yeah, just to tie this all back around, the starts that do kind of threaten to run you over were those green stompy starts that don't exist quite as much anymore. So yeah, just want to start here to frame the episode. If you have found yourself not winning and you were winning the first week or two of the format, this might be why. This little bit of a shift to more big game, more grind, more of a need to have a late game plan. All right, so let's get into talking about this blue-black control deck. I'm going to get into some real specifics, talk about a lot of cards I like in this deck in a few minutes, but I just want to start broad here, talk about what's going on here and how you want to think about drafting this deck. So, I think this is just such a classic, typical limited control deck where your plans just kill all their stuff, draw a bunch of cards, and then win somehow, win eventually. And I think one of the reasons this deck is pretty good is that all three of those things you kind of find in an abundance in this format. There's a lot of removal. It's kind of a format feature. There is quite a bit of card draw, and, you know, ways to win the game. I mean, we've got all these spacecrafts running around. It's a very good way to win the game. Even something just like a Pinnacle Kill Ship, right? The 7-mana common one, 7/7 flyer, comes in, deals 10 to something. It's not fancy. You can usually pick up a copy or two of these in any draft, and yeah, it's a fine way to finish a game. The deck's often going to have an artifact theme. You know, the Signpost in common, Alpha Rail, that kind of points towards that direction. This is the 3-mana gold card. It's a 2/3. When it enters, you draw 2 cards, and then you discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact. And during your turn, Alpha Rail has Death Touch. There's also, of course, just like a bunch of various artifact synergies that you might want in your deck. You know, the Self-Craft Mechan, the 4-mana blue creature that sacks an artifact to draw a card. Like, that's a pretty good card in this deck, too. So, yeah, there's definitely some value to picking up the trinkety artifacts, stuff like Nutrition Block. That's the single-mana indestructible food that you can sack, and when it goes to the grave, you draw a card. That's a card that I play a lot in these decks. Actually pretty nice, too, because, like, that life buffer, that matters a lot, too, as well as just being an artifact for the cards that care about that. Another thing that really is a boon to this blue-black control deck and drafting in this format is that there are a lot of field wipes, a lot of wraths, right? That's another format feature. And it really, really does help if you have one of these field wipes. I don't think they're necessary, but it makes your life a lot easier, right? If you fall behind, it's really nice that there's like an easy reset button. One of the interesting little wrinkles when drafting this deck, something to think about, is creature count. Because usually when drafting a control deck, you know, I'm talking about drafting control decks in other formats, I really highlight the fact that you don't need, you know, the standard 15, 16 creatures. You can go down to 10, 9. As long as your other spells are affecting the board, like the removal spells basically, you'll be okay. It's not a big deal. In this format, you do have to respect your creature count if some of your non-creatures are spacecraft, right? So if you've got like 2 to 3 spacecraft, I wouldn't want to dip to that like 9 or 8 creature range. You want to keep it in like the 13, 14 range if you can. Because, you know, when I was kind of learning the ropes of this deck, one of the things I ran into, I was like, okay, I don't want to do that again, is I was playing, you know, 11 creatures and had 2 Pinnacle Kill Ships. And I was kind of thinking, okay, you know, like, no, I'm not going to be able to station these right away. You know, I'm just not going to have that many creatures. My creatures are not that high power. But it's a catch-all removal spell, and I'll turn them on eventually. I think you want your closing speed in this deck to be pretty quick, which is to say once you've stabilized, you want to be able to end the game pretty quickly right after that. And so it does matter. It matters that you can station your Pinnacle Kill Ship as soon as possible. I had a lot of games where, you know, I killed their thing, I stabilized, and then my opponent outdrew me. They drew into their rare, they drew into their hasty Godma, you know, the 7-mana green trample haste creature. And, you know, that wouldn't have happened if I was able to kill them quickly. So yeah, you can have decks in this format that are 9, 7, 8 creatures, whatever, but you can't do that if you have the spacecraft. And there are some blue-black decks that don't have spacecraft. Like, I've had quite a few that just don't. All right, let's get into talking about some specific cards here and reasons to draft this deck, reasons to move into it, or rares. Specifically, we're going to have a rares start off with that. When I first pick, I go, yeah, I really want to draft blue-black control. So, I mean, the most obvious one that we'll start with is Singularity Rupture. This is the blue-black gold card, 3 blue-black-black sorcery, destroy all creatures, and then any number of target players mills half their library rounded down. Awesome card. You know, I was talking about wanting a field wipe, and it's kind of a, you know, 2-in-1 spot in your deck where it's a field wipe, keeps you alive, but then also kind of sort of acts as a win condition. I mean, you know, if you're facing a more aggressive deck, it doesn't always act like a win condition, but versus a slower deck or a mid-rangey deck, you know, you cast this one, they've got 22 cards in their library, they go down to 11, it can be kind of hard for them to win the game at that point before they deck, right? You just have to kind of outlast them. So really great card. I first picked many a Singularity Rupture and been very happy about it. 2 other field wipe effects that are pretty good too, not quite as good as Singularity Rupture, but cards I like. 0-point Ballad is the X and a black sorcery at rare. Destroy all creatures toughness X or less, you lose X life, and if X is 6 or more, you get to choose one of the creatures that went to the graveyard this way, put it on the battlefield. The other one is Extinguisher Battleship. This is the 8-mana rare spacecraft that comes in, deals 4 damage to everything, and you can destroy 1 target non-creature permanent. Also, when it stations fully at 5 counters, it becomes a 10-10 flying trample. You know, I was talking about closing speed. 10-10 flying trample kills your opponent very quickly. So out of these 3 wrath effects, Singularity Rupture is the one that I'm most likely to first pick. I think it's just the strongest of the bunch. 0-point Ballad and Extinguisher Battleship, usually I'll end up with those After I get them passed to me, like, third, fourth pick. You sometimes see them in that range. And maybe I've already started with some blue cards or some black cards, and I get past a Wrath effect. I'm like, okay, well, now if I do want to draft blue-black, I've got this sort of scarce card type. I've got a Wrath, which is, a big benefit for this kind of deck. Some Mythics to call out here. So Quantum Riddler. This is the 5-mana 4/6 flyer that has Warp for 2 mana. When it enters, you draw a card, and if you've got 1 or fewer cards in hand, you draw 2 instead. Amazing card, of course, good in any deck, but, especially good in this kind of deck where it acts as both your card advantage and a finisher, and when you're pairing it with black, you can recur it, so, this is the kind of card that very often dies when you play it, so just being able to go like, all right, play a drama card, the opponent goes, all right, I guess I gotta kill that thing, they kill it, and you recur it with, maybe a Fel Grab Ship, that's the uncommon spacecraft that returns something from your graveyard to your hand. We've also got Weft Walking, one of my favorite cards in the set. This is the 4 blue enchantment in Mythic. When it enters, if you cast it, shuffle your hand and graveyard into your library, draw 7 cards, and the first spell that each player casts each turn, they get to cast it for free. So yeah, just, a big draw 7. The downside of this card, of your opponent getting it casting for free, by the way, often I don't find comes up that much. Like, it can come up if you're in Control Mirror, where your opponent has a lot of card draw themselves. But often you're just going to cast Weft Walking when the opponent's got, like, 1, 2 cards in hand, and they probably could cast those anyways. So, you really only get punished by that, I find, when you're facing, like, a similarly slower controlling deck, where they might be like, hey, draw a bunch of cards, cast my big card, draw spell, and then I have all my mana still to do stuff. That can be a bit awkward. Mostly, though, you're just like, great, 6 mana, draw 7, now I'm going to outcard you, you have no cards in hand, what are you going to do? One more here, a very similar card to Weft Walking, in a sense where it's just like, all right, this thing's going to draw me a million cards, and your opponent can never really keep up card advantage-wise. The Endstone, this is the 7-mana Mythic that says whenever you play a land or cast a spell, you draw a card, and at the beginning of your end step, your life total becomes half your starting life total rounded up, which for us limited players, of course, just means 10. One thing that I think is interesting to note regarding the rares when drafting this deck is often when you're drafting a control deck in limited, one of the things you'll hear people talk about is you don't really want to go into a control deck, like a true control deck of just card draw and removal, if you don't have a reason to be this deck, right? So you want to start with an over-the-top big rare, like the Endstone, where you go, okay, I'm just going to try to find this, cast this, it's going to win me the game. If you don't have that kind of card, why are you trying to play this grindy, slow game, just, kind of play a normal creature combat kind of game? It's sort of the idea. I think in this set, you can kind of tone that idea down a little bit, which is to say I'm pretty happy to move into this deck without good rares and Mythics first. I mean, it's always nice to have, of course, but because the spacecraft give you a really reliable common finisher, and the commons and uncommons give you really good card draw and removal, I feel like all the pieces are there without even needing rares. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. I've been saying I've been drafting this deck a lot, and there was a string of, I don't know, it was like 6 drafts in a row where I wasn't trying to force it. I just kind of naturally ended up in it. And I think out of those 6 drafts, only like 3 of them even had rares. I think 3 of those just ended up with a bunch of commons and uncommons, maybe 1 rare in there, nothing spectacular. And just looking at the results of the decks that did have rares compared to the ones that didn't have rares, they won it about the same tick. Most of them got to like 4, 5, 6 wins. Okay, that's gonna do it for the rares. Now let's get into talking about the commons and uncommons you want to prioritize for this deck. I want to kind of build a shell of what we're dealing with here. So we're gonna start with the commons, and what the commons give you, well, 1, a bunch of removal, right? There's just like a bunch of good removal that we'll talk about in a few minutes here. But 2, when I'm drafting blue-black, there's this core of 4 commons I really like to prioritize quite highly. And they are Cryogen Relic, Embrace Oblivion, Virus Beetle, and Self-Craft Mechan. It's kind of this package of artifact synergy stuff that just plays very well with what this deck wants to do. So the start of the show here, as is true for most blue decks, Cryogen Relic. This is your everything, basically. Like, this is the #1 card you want to prioritize a common in this deck. I'm very happy to second pick a Cryogen Relic quite often. I'm happy to play 4 or 5. I actually saw somebody sent me a post of their latest deck. Their latest, it was a blue-black deck that had 7 Cryogen Relics, and they said it wasn't too much. So, I haven't had that many. I haven't had the privilege of having that many, but good to know that that's not too many. I'm not surprised. Card is very, very good. So Cryogen Relic, first card in his collection of cards, is awesome. Embrace Oblivion is the next one. So this is the single black mana sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you sack an artifact or creature, destroy target creature or spacecraft. Very efficient removal spell. Obviously, you need sack fodder, but your handy dandy Cryogen Relic comes to the rescue. It's a very, very good thing to sacrifice. Such a nice 1-2 punch. We've got Virus Beetle as well, which is the 2 mana 1/1 that when it enters, each opponent discards a card. So it just really helps to help grind out the opponent, get to that game state where you've outcarded them, they're out of resources, you're up a bunch of cards. Another thing that's nice to sacrifice to the Embrace Oblivion. And then last card of this package here, Selfcraft Mechan, the 4-mana 3/4. When it enters, you can sack an artifact, and you draw a card and put a counter on something. So you can sack your Virus Beetle, draw a card, sack your Cryogen Relic, draw 2 cards, put a counter on something. So all 4 of these cards kind of mesh together nicely and say, like, okay, I'm drawing you cards, netting you advantage, and then I'll sacrifice them either for value to the Mechan or to get a really nice tempo exchange with this 1-mana removal spell with this Embrace Oblivion. Also, if you don't have the Cryogen Relics, you can sub in Nutrient Block. That's the single mana food that when it goes to the graveyard, you draw a card. Obviously not as good. But if you just, like, take these 4 cards, Relic, Embrace Oblivion, Beetle, Mechan, sub out Relic for the block, it kind of does the same thing, right? Like, it sacks the Oblivion, it sacks to your Mechan. The fact that it's a food is actually kind of nice, just gaining 3 life at some point is something that's pretty relevant. And then we go to the numerous removal spells at common. So, as far as counts go, I think you're aiming for, like, 7, 8 removal spells, something in that range. And the common ones I like the most are Cryo Shatter, the 1-mana blue aura, Depressurize, the 2-mana instant that essentially gives something -3/-3, and Grav Kill, the 4-mana exile a creature or spacecraft. Out of these 3, I think I like my first Depressurize over the other 2. They're all pretty darn close. They all kind of offer you something different. Shatter is the most efficient, of course, but, can be kind of awkward against some creatures with really good static abilities. Depressurize is really nice, but you don't want to load up too much on those because you can, run to, like, a big green deck where there's like, okay, well, a bunch of these don't really do too much. And then Grav Kill, kind of the opposite, where it's like, okay, well, if I face, like, a red-black deck, a bunch of Grav Kills isn't going to be as good. So yeah, these are all fairly equivalent in my eyes, and I think it's kind of the case where it's like, okay, I'll take the first Grav Kill over the second Depressurize, and the first Cryo Shatter over the second Grav Kill, that kind of thing. I don't mind mixing matching there. The other removal spells or interaction spells are common here. So we've got Lost in Space, which is the 4-mana blue top or bottom spell. Totally fine, kind of a Grav Kill stand-in if you don't get those. But I also like Divert Disaster, the counter spell, 2-mana instant counter unless they pay 2. I mean, you don't want to fill up on this card. This card has some diminishing returns. But if you need to, if you aren't at that 9-ish things to do before turn 3, then yeah, Divert Disaster does the job just fine. And like I mentioned before, I also like Pinnacle Killship, a copy or 2 in decks that have enough creatures, decks where you can get to that 14-15 creature range. The last group of commons I want to talk about here are the non-Virus Beetle, non-Selfcraft Mechan creatures that I like in this deck. And the list is not very long. It's a pretty small handful of cards that I like here. So the first one is Hull Carver, single black mana for a 1/1 Death Touch artifact creature. Good at blocking, good against the green decks, is a cheap artifact for your cards that care about that. I also like Gravpack Monoist. This is the 2-mana 2/1 flyer in black that dies into a 2/2 robot token. This is a pretty annoying blocker for the opponent. They don't really want to send their 2-mana creature into your thing that's just going to die into a 2/2. And, you really appreciate the kind of incremental card advantage from this card. Also, in a slower game where the board's stalled, it can peck in. It can be a win condition of sorts sometimes. We've also got 2... I'd call them sometimes food creatures here, where I like the Monoist and the Hull Carver, and basically all my blue-black decks. These other 2 here, I kind of want some other things going on to really appreciate them. So these are Perigee Beckoner and Mechanizoa, kind of more expensive cards here. So Perigee Beckoner, of course, the 5-mana 4/5 in black, that when it enters, something gets +2/+0, and if that thing were to die, you bring it back. Also has a warp for 2 mana. I like this card a lot, just in general, in all of my black decks, but of course you do need to have a relatively high creature count to make it good. If it comes in and doesn't do anything, it's just a big 5-mana 4/5 creature, that's not really good enough. You want to be actually doing something interesting with the effect. And also, I wanted a high creature count deck, which also is nice because it has synergy with the spacecraft, where a Beckoner often, if you warp it in, it plus the thing that you pump can station pretty much any spacecraft. So yeah, Beckoner good in the decks that have a high creature count and have spacecraft, which are often kind of one and the same. I also like Beckoner a lot when I've got copies of Virus Beetle plus Embrace Oblivion. So, of course, you go like, warp in, target my Beetle, maybe get in for an attack, but even if they don't block, they don't trade, you then sack it to the Embrace Oblivion, it comes back, they discard a card, so nice little synergies there. The other creature I like sometimes is Mechanizoa. This is the 6-mana 5/5 that comes in, taps down a creature, puts a stun counter on it, you can warp it for 3 mana. So I like this card when I'm a little bit short on removal. You know, it's just kind of some decent interaction. Same with the Perigee Beckoner. I like it a lot when I have Spacecraft. It's just a really nice way to supercharge your Spacecraft quickly. Just like the Beckoner, I want this more in my creature heavy decks than my low creature count decks. One of the nice things about this card is once you've stabilized and set up, you know, a flying clock or just a good board, it can be the thing that turns the corner, right? Like, they have one good blocker and you tap that down and you're the beatdown now. So this card can kind of do that. It also interacts nicely with Cryo Shatter, right? Because if there is a creature with a particularly problematic static ability, you go, okay, Cryo Shatter your creature, Mechanizo it, warp it in, and it actually just kills it, right? Because, you know, the creature with Cryo Shatter dies when it becomes tapped. All right, and now let's talk about some uncommons you're on the lookout for in this deck. And there's actually a lot of really good uncommons for this deck. So I think the most premium common you can have is Dubious Delicacy. This is a 3 mana black artifact with flash. When it comes in, something gets -3/-3, and you can pay 2, tap, sack it to either have the opponent lose 3 life or you gain 3 life. So it's an artifact, which matters. It's a removal spell that gains life, which is awesome. It puts itself in the graveyard, which is relevant for a card we're going to talk about in a few minutes, Scour from Scrap, which is the blue instant that gets a artifact out of your grave and out of your deck. So yeah, you just, you know, being able to rebuy this is excellent. The other really premium uncommon, you know, these two are in the same pack. If I had to make the choice, I would probably take Delicacy over Codecracker Hound, but very close. So Codecracker Hound is the 3 mana, 2/1 in blue with Warp for 3 mana. When it enters, you look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand. One of the more common questions I've gotten about this card is how often should you be warping it versus just playing it out? I warp it more often than just playing it out, you know, as the creature. Like, usually, I don't know, just put a rough number on it, like 70% of the time I would say I do choose to warp it. It's going to depend on the game state, of course, right? Like, just like an average number isn't going to be all that helpful, honestly. But if you are kind of unsure in the game when you should warp it or not, I would just lean towards doing it, you know, unless you're under like a ton of pressure and like, I know I have to block here, you know, when it's really obvious that you're just supposed to play out your 2/1 creature, sure. But I would recommend trying to get full value on it. Past those 2 super duper premium uncommons, we've got 2 really good top end cards that I prioritize pretty highly. Mouth of the Storm, my beloved, the card I talked about on every single episode of this format, because I think it's great. This is the 7 mana 6/6 flying ward 2. When it enters, the opponent's creatures get -3, -0. Really great stabilizing play. As is Monolith Circuit Feeder, the 6 mana 4/4 flyer in black that when it enters, something your opponent controls shrinks, something you control grows based on the number of artifacts you control. And then just under those cards, we're kind of going to the next level down of premiumness. So I really like Fell Graveship. This is the Spacecraft, the black one that comes in, mills 3. You take a Spacecraft or a creature from your graveyard, put it into your hand, and at 8 counters, it becomes a flying lifelinking 2/3. Yeah, again, just kind of everything this deck wants. Is an artifact, is a lifelinker, so, you know, you're going to be able to stabilize with it, can win the game, gives you card advantage. Similar, not as good, but similar kind of card as the Uthros Scanship. This is the 4 mana blue Spacecraft that when it comes in, draw 2 and discard a card. Don't like it quite as much, but, you know, it's good card advantage. Past that, I like Follower's Faithful a lot in this deck. This is the 3 mana 3/1 in black that when it enters, you destroy target creature, and its controller draws 2 unless it was dealt damage this turn. So usually I'm just using this to like sacrifice my Virus Beetles, draw 2 cards. Sometimes, you know, you do kill one of your opponent's creatures that you don't have any other answers to. Not great to do, but it's, you know, emergency mode buyout card. I generally see this as a card advantage card, though, right? A way for you to go up cards. Gigastorm Titan, this is the 5 mana 4/4 that costs 2 mana if you cast another spell this turn. Really nice body, blocks really well. Can even start beating down if you wanted to. And one uncommon that I love a ton, and I don't think there's too many underrated cards in the set still, but I think this is one of them. I get this on pretty late. Uthros Psionesis. This is the 3 mana 2/4 that says the second spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. And I see this card as sort of, not exactly a synergy card, because it's going to be just good or fine in most blue decks, but it really pairs well with card draw. So the more relics you have, the more just raw card draw, the more I want this card, so that you can actually continue to get a mana advantage as the game goes on, right? If you like kind of like just dump your hand, it's like, all right, Psionesis did its thing. It's not going to look amazing, but if you've got the cards flowing, which, you know, is something you really want in this deck, then yeah, it's just going to make you a ton of mana over the course of a few turns. 2 awesome removal spells. Tragic Trajectory is the black mana -2/-2 that if Void is active, that creature gets -10/-10 instead. So again, this is another card that plays well if you've got the relics, plays well with Nutrient Block, just generally plays well with other removal spells, so you can have a nice double spell turn where you like, kill something and then try to trajectory something else. Sculpting Blast, another great one, is the 2-mana bounce spell that if you target a attacking creature, you make a 1/1 drone token, which, can peck in here and there or trump block a flyer, but also you can sack it to your Selfcraft Mechan. You can sack this to your Embrace Oblivion. So kind of just like a nice bounce spell that gives you a piece of sack fodder is the idea. There's also the Specimen Freighter. This is the 6-mana blue spacecraft, 4/7 flyer at 9 counters, and when it attacks, the opponent mills 4 cards. Just all the things I've said about spacecraft definitely apply to this one. 9 is not a small number. You definitely have to be fairly creature heavy. I also like this just less than the other top-end cards we've talked about. I mean, it's fine. It's totally a fine top-end card. I have played it when I've just needed that spot filled. I didn't pick up even a Pinnacle Kill Ship, let's just say. Totally gets the job done. I just think it's like a worse version of, something else you might want in that spot. I want to take a minute to really dive deep on the card Scour from Scrap, because this is a card that I've been really enjoying in the majority of my blue-black decks. It doesn't have very good stats on 17 lands, but I have to imagine part of that is a deck building thing, because I'm just thrilled to draw this card every time I draw it. So Scour from Scrap is the 4-mana blue instant at uncommon. You get to choose one or both. You either look for a artifact from your deck, put it into your hand, or get an artifact from your graveyard to put it into your hand. So I basically see this as a really nice card advantage card that takes a little bit of work to make good. And I really do mean a little bit. I don't think it takes a lot. You have to have a decent artifact count in general, right? You just, by the sheer numbers of, well, okay, I really want to be able to, when I cast this, get something out of the grave and search for something. So that means you're looking at something in the 10, 11, 12 artifact range. That's our first prerequisite here. It also really helps to have cheap artifacts, because again, when you cast it, and you want to cast it, relatively early-ish in the game, you don't want to be waiting until turn 9 before you can cast your Scour from Scrap. When you cast it, you want to be able to get an artifact back from your graveyard. So, there's a bunch of really good cheap ones. There's Hull Carver, the 1-mana 1/1 Death Touch. There's Nutrient Block and Cryogen Relic. Those both put themselves in the graveyard. Like I mentioned, Dubious Delicacy is an awesome thing to get back with Scour from Scrap. Just being able to kill something, sack this, get it back, do it all again. You can pitch an artifact with the blue, black, gold card, Alpha Rail. It's a good way to get an artifact in the graveyard. So yeah, you want high artifact count in general. You want cheap artifacts to go to the graveyard. You also, if you can, ideally, you want a spread of different things to go get from your deck. Like, really treating this as a toolbox card and just get whatever you need. So it's great to have a Cryogen Relic if you need card advantage. It's great to go get a Hull Carver. If you have a tight turn, a turn you're tight on mana, and you go, okay, I Scour from Scrap, go get my best creature from my deck, or best artifact from my deck, get back the Hull Carver, play it in that turn. That's a fine turn. It's nice to be able to search for interaction. So like I mentioned, the Dubious Delicacy. I also like having a copy of Mechanizoa generally when I have Scour from Scrap, because Mechanizoa is another, interaction spell. Also, sometimes you just need a big threat, need a big blocker. You've got spacecraft in your hand. You're like, okay, I'm gonna get my Mechanizoa so I can warp this in and station quickly. Also really nice if you do have Extinguisher Battleship. This is the 8-mana spacecraft rare, comes and deals 4 damage to everything, so you kind of have a tutorable Wrath at that point, so that's kind of cool. Being tutor a Virus Beetle to get your opponent's last card is awesome. Also, I've had a lot of spots where my opponent's got a Virus Beetle, I discard an artifact early on because I've got a Scour from Scrap in my hand, so I'm like, great, I don't even have to solve the puzzle of how do I get an artifact in my graveyard. My opponent's gotta help me out here. So yeah, a really big fan of Scour from Scrap. You don't have to take it highly, these tend to go pretty late. But keep an eye out for it. I think it's something that you'll be pretty happy with. 2 sort of interesting cards here are Voidforged Titan and Hymn of the Faller. So Voidforged Titan is the 5-mana 5/4 in black that if Void is triggered, you draw a card and lose a life on your end step. Hymn of the Faller is 2-mana sorcery, Surveil 1, you draw a card, you lose a life. And if Void is on, you get to draw another card. So both these cards I like situationally in blue-black. The more relics, the more nutrient blocks, the more ways I have to trigger Void for cheap and on command, the more I like these cards. I kind of want to talk actually quickly about Hymn of the Faller, because this is a card that I've seen a lot of confusion about, or, just people asking why, if you check on 17 lands, why is this card performing so poorly? Because, it seems fine. It seems like an okay floor and a pretty good ceiling. And I think the reason is that the floor is actually pretty bad, right? The floor of 2 mana, cycle, lose a life. The Surveil doesn't count for nothing, I suppose. But if you have to cast this and you don't have Void on, you're just in a spot where it's like, man, I don't foresee myself being able to trigger Void anytime soon, and you're just like, okay, I've just got to cycle this. It's pretty bad. And the ceiling is good, but it's not amazing, right? 2 mana draw 2, that's really solid, but I'm not over the moon about it. So, I kind of view this card as a fine card. Same with the Titan, to be honest. A fine card if you can trigger Void, but nothing special generally. The last thing I want to cover today is splashing when you're drafting this deck, which is something I do, I'd say like 30-ish% of my blue-black drafts. It's pretty tempting, pretty appealing to splash. First thing I want to say about splashing is when I'm in blue-black, I'm going to take the first command bridge fairly highly. This is the common land that enters tapped, and you have to tap something or else you sacrifice it. It adds a mana of any color. This is not a card I like very much in the format in general. Some decks like it more than others. Sometimes it's a necessary evil, but I don't just include this in every 2-color deck or anything like that. If I don't have a card I want to splash when I'm drafting blue-black, I have a command bridge at some point, but I didn't see a card I want to splash, I will still play it a lot of the time. Reason being that the cost to playing this card of needing to tap something is quite low in this deck. There's a lot of trinkety artifacts like the Cryogen Relic, like your Nutrient Block, a Virus Beetle. You could even tap a Cryo Shatter, right? It just says tap a permanent. It doesn't have to be, an artifact or a creature or something. You can tap your own enchantment or removal spell. So I find that in general, like, this is just a good land in a lot of my blue-black decks that have those trinkets. It improves your mana base. That's just all good stuff, right? And of course, it opens up the pathway to be like, oh, I got past like a War Maker Gunner, which is the rare spacecraft, the red one that comes in, deals damage equal to the number of artifacts you control. Like, that's a great card. I've splashed that card quite a bit in this deck. And if you speculate on a command bridge, you go, great, I take this. Maybe I have something that makes a lander. I find some other source. Maybe I play a mountain. I can splash this awesome card. But the other reason I really like speculating on command bridge is it makes 2 uncommons that we haven't talked about just yet, but I really like, makes them good, playable, better. So I'm talking Survey Mechan and All Fate Scroll. So Survey Mechan is the 4-mana 1/3 hexproof flyer that you can sack for 10 mana, but it gets reduced based on the number of different lands you control. Deal 3 to something, you gain 3, draw 3 cards. Great card. Really, really like this card. It's card advantage, it's removal, it's life gain, it's everything you want in this deck. I would love to enable this card, and enabling it generally means getting it to be 7 mana to activate. So, just Swamp, Island, Command Bridge, that's 7 mana. Also, All Fate Scroll, a very similar situation, the 3-mana artifact that adds a mana of any color. You can also pay 7, tap sack it to draw X cards, where X is the number of differently named lands you control. Draw 3s are just awesome in this deck. Like, they're just exactly what you want when you've got a pile of removal spells. Another draw 3 that I actually didn't mention in the uncommon section is Cerebral Download, the 5-mana instant, Surveil X, where X is the number of artifacts you control, then draw 3 cards. Very happy with this card too, generally. And so basically what it boils down to is, even if I'm not splashing anything, I will often play the command bridge to enable these 2 awesome colorless cards. And also, it lets me splash something that I might want to splash. I mentioned a good rare, but you also sometimes just splash removal, right? I've had spots where I didn't end up with enough good removal in blue and black. So often I'll reach out to red and I'll splash Orbital Plunge, which is a pretty nice removal spell. It's the deal 6 and make a lander token. I think the real important takeaway, and this is like one of my biggest kind of little level ups when I was learning to draft this deck, was just realizing, hey, I really do want to take a command bridge, both because it just makes my mana base better at a pretty low cost, and it enables these awesome draw 3 uncommons. And that's going to be it for today's episode. Thank you for watching and listening. If you made it this far, do check out the Patreon. That's in the description if you want to support the show. We don't run ads or anything here, so this is a completely crowdfunded show. A bunch of rewards over there if you want to give back to the show. And if you want to give back in a non-monetary way, like, comment, subscribe on the YouTube video. Really goes a long way. We'll be back, I think, Friday. I think we'll do a double episode week, with this delay here. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get out a Friday episode as well this week. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll see you next time, everybody.